With the Revenant episode, we got 3 new exotics, one for each class, and each has a focus around using Stasis abilities. I know a lot of people like using Getaway Artist with Prismatic because you get the Arc Soul, you get a Bleak Watcher, you become amplified. There are a lot of benefits, but with the new Rime-Coat Raiment exotic chest piece, it takes Bleak Watchers to a whole nother level. Let's not waste any time and dive right into it. Like I said, the new Warlock exotic is a chest piece called the Rime-Coat Raiment with its perk, Bleak Domain. Your Bleak Watcher turrets are enhanced with extended range and are surrounded by stasis crystals and a storm. While you're standing in the storm, you are granted icicles over time. Icicles activate when you fire your weapons, applying slow to targets they hit. So not only do your Bleak Watchers get that enhanced range, but having those stasis crystals around you can be good for one of two things. The first one being if you want to break them to clear ads around you, you totally can, and they reappear occasionally, which is pretty cool. And number two, you can use the crystals as a way to block damage from enemies trying to shoot you from far away. In any event, having the storm below the Bleak Watcher, if enemies run through it, it does slow them down. And with those icicles, pretty much all of your guns have the slow proc applied to them. So if you're shooting a target that's also being hit by the Bleak Watcher, it freezes them very quickly. Now for your subclass, I'm actually going to break down the Prismatic and the Stasis setups for this build because both are fantastic in their own right. You know, with Prismatic, we can get Devour, which means we can get the grenades back pretty quickly. But to be honest, I was really enjoying the Stasis subclass setup with it, so I did want to include both. First up, starting with Prismatic, for the super, we gotta go with Song of Flame. It's just a very powerful super to use. For my abilities, I'm opting for the Healing Rift, but you can use the Empowering Rift. The reason I say either or is because you gain most of the benefits from being inside the storm below your Bleak Watcher, so either you want the bonus damage from Empowering Rift, or you want to be able to heal yourself with the Healing Rift. So both of those are decent options. You could totally do Phoenix Dive as well, but I would recommend one of the Rifts. For movement, I like Burst Glide, but you can use what you like. For the melee, I'm just going with Arcane Needle because we do get 3 melees and we can create tangles. If we shoot the tangle and it breaks and kills a bunch of targets, it does proc Devour as well. And then for the grenade, I'm going with the Healing Grenade because it has the fastest cooldown compared to the rest of the grenades, which means I can have that Bleak Watcher up faster. For your aspects, obviously we're going to need Bleak Watchers, so when your grenade energy is full, you can convert your grenade into that stasis turret, which again, the chest piece will improve. Next, we're going with Feed the Void. So when you defeat a target with any ability, it activates Devour. Your Devour effects are improved, restoring additional health and grenade energy. Essentially, once you have Devour proc, each kill you get is going to restore you back to full health and give you more grenade energy. Now, it's pretty cool with Feed the Void and the Stasis Crystals. If you get a multi-kill when you shoot the crystals around you and the enemies are there, it'll proc Devour as well. So you don't necessarily have to use the melee or even use your grenade prior to be able to proc Devour. You can actually do it off of the Stasis Crystal, which is pretty cool. For my fragments, first up, I'm going with Facet of Hope. While you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. Essentially, once I have any buff, light or dark wise, I want to be able to have my healing or empowering rift back as quickly as possible. So when I have my Bleak Watcher up and ready, I can use that rift. Next, using Facet of Solitude. Landing rapid precision hits emits a severing blast from the target, while Transcendent, the severing blast is bigger. The main thing here is that since I'm going to be camping out under my Bleak Watcher and I'm mostly going to be using precision weapons to take down targets, I want to be able to proc even more debuffs on the field, and having, you know, the free sever debuff just from hitting headshots and having the potential to create tangles from that is going to be pretty good. Next, I like Facet of Dawn overall. So power melee hits against targets makes you radiant. Power melee final blows makes you and nearby allies radiant. It is a -10 to strength. The main thing here is that having radiant is going to allow you to pop anti-barrier champions and you get bonus weapon damage for a short time. Next, Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage, while Transcendent, the effect is increased. That's a +10 to strength. Then lastly, Facet of Purpose. Essentially, when you pick up an Orb of Power, it's going to give you a buff based on the super that you have. In this case, we have Song of Flame, which means when we pick up Orbs of Power, that's going to proc Restoration, so we get the, you know, health regenerations over time. Now going over the Stasis subclass, for my abilities, for class ability, you can either do Healing or the Empowering Rift again. For movement, I like Burst Glide, but you can use what you like. We only have the one melee, which is the Penumbral Blast. Again, this will freeze targets when it hits. And then lastly, I'm going with the Dustfield Grenade because it has the fastest cooldown compared to all the grenades, because again, we mainly are going to be using the Bleak Watcher. Now again, you are going to want the Bleak Watcher aspect, but for the second one, I'm going with Glacial Harvest. So when you freeze a target, it creates stasis shards around those frozen targets. Higher tier combatants create more shards, while Glacial Harvest is equipped. Picking up Stasis shards grants stacks of Frost armor. And again, Frost armor is the stackable damage resistance that we can get, which is going to be good for survivability purposes. For fragments, I decided to go with number 1, Whisper of Refraction. Defeating slowed or frozen targets grants you class ability energy, which means we can have the Rift up whenever we have the grenade up. Next, Whisper of Durance. Slow that you apply to targets lasts longer. For those abilities that linger, their duration will also increase. That's a plus 10 to strength. Next, Whisper of Shards. Shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts your grenade recharge rate. Shattering additional stasis crystals increases the duration of this benefit. This fragment is literally free with the setup because with all the stasis crystals you're creating with the Bleak domain perk, you're essentially going to have the faster grenade uptime all the time. That's why I like the Stasis setup, because you don't necessarily need Devour like you do with Prismatic to take advantage of it. All you have to do with this is break some Stasis crystals occasionally, and you get free grenade regen. And then lastly, I like Whisper of Conduction. So those nearby Stasis shards will automatically track to your position. That is a plus 10 to resilience and plus 10 to intellect. The reason I like this, so you don't have to go out of your way to collect those Stasis shards. They just come right to you. Now for your artifact perks, I want to talk about which ones I use for each of the subclasses because they are different. If I was using the Stasis Super on Prismatic, I would pretty much keep it the same as I would with the Stasis subclass, but since I'm not, there are definitely a couple things you're going to need to change up. For the Prismatic setup, in the first column for your weapon champion mods, you can use what you like. In the second column, I just put on Killing Breeze and then Rapid Impact. Since I am going to be using a grenade launcher with this, I want to be able to take advantage of the increased reload speed when it is necessary. In the third column, I just go with Total Carnage for the increased damage resistance after I perform a finisher, and then Trace Evidence, since I am using a weapon that can jolt targets. Getting those rapid precision hits or final blows will generate automatic traces, which means more ability energy for me. In the fourth column, I definitely want Hail the Storm. So when you shatter those stasis crystals, it releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. And again, we're going to have plenty of those on the field. Next, I have Debilitating Wave, which goes into Total Carnage here, and then Concussive Reload. So using a grenade launcher to damage a boss, damage a champion, or break a combatant shield, it weakens them. This one is pretty important, especially when paired with rapid impacts. In the final column, Brain Freeze is pretty good here. So frozen combatants become surrounded by a chilling fog, which slows combatants that aren't already, and weapons with the Dark Ether Reaper origin trait deal more damage to those frozen combatants. And then lastly, I just use Conductive Cosmic Crystal. So my arc and void abilities and weapons with the Dark Ether Reaper origin trait do bonus damage to targets that are affected by a stasis debuff, which means they're going to be affected by the debuff pretty much all the time with the Bleak Watcher. Now for the Stasis setup, again, for your weapon champion mods in the first column, use what you like. I did end up putting on one with Frost, so while you have Frost armor, your Stasis weapons gain increased reload speed and stability. Stasis swords gain increased guard resistance. Next, with Armor of Aramis, while you have Frost armor, taking critical damage from combatants causes you to emit a freezing burst around you, which is very nice. Now, I did also put on Crystalline Converter. This one's pretty important since we are using a Stasis melee. So whenever you gather those Stasis shards, again, you're going to gain stacks of the Crystalline Converter perk. Your next powered Stasis melee hit creates Stasis crystals equal to the number of stacks you have. So not only can you freeze targets with the Warlock melee, if you have the perk up, you can also create Stasis crystals around that, which is fantastic. Again, I still have on Rapid Impacts with Concussive Reload and also Trace Evidence with Brain Freeze as well. But I did end up putting on Served Cold in the final column because when you pick up those Stasis shards, it'll also grant us class ability energy. This pretty much guarantees we're going to have all of our abilities up all the time with the Stasis setup. Now that we talked about how the subclass and the artifact work together, what weapons can we use to synergize it even more? And I personally like pairing up the Lost Signal with the new Vantage Point Pulse Rifle, and then I just put on the Prospector, but some other weapons will do. We'll talk about those after this. The reason I like Lost Signal is because it's an area denial frame grenade launcher. It essentially is the legendary version of what Witherhoard is. I have enhanced autoloading and reverberation. Again, those final blows with the weapon increase the size of the detonations for an improved duration. And the cool thing is that if I'm in the storm with my Bleak Watcher and ads are coming at me, I can have the Stasis crystals around me. Plus, I can just launch this at my feet. And the cool thing is it'll break all the Stasis crystals around me and proc all the other artifact bonuses. Plus, this can apply the weaken debuff to those higher tier targets. Now, the reason I like this pulse is because it could come with a new perk called Jolting Feedback. So dealing repeated damage with the weapon inflicts jolt at an increased rate. While amplified, jolt is applied faster. Again, this is the enhanced trait, but with its origin perk. Final blows of the weapon periodically spawn Dark Ether charges. Charges can be detonated early with weapon fire or by coming into contact with them. Doing so refills the weapon from reserves, and what it doesn't tell you is that it overflows the magazine. Now, the reason that's important is because with Trace Evidence, again, as long as I get those rapid final blows or precision hits, essentially I am guaranteed to hit Jolt at some point with that weapon, which means those are free ionic traces, so that means free ability energy with the pulse rifle. Now for the heavy weapon, like I said, I just put on Prospector. It did get a buff, so it does feel pretty good. All the arc explosions, you can destroy a lot of ads. Maybe not the best for DPS, so it's not necessary to use, so you can use whatever heavy that you'd like. I would recommend, though, if you can get your hands on the new Bittersweet grenade launcher from the season, Envious Arsenal with Bait and Switch, with that Dark Ether Reaper Origin Trait perk, this thing is an absolute beast. And some other kinetic weapon options if you want to use the new Liturgy grenade launcher from the season is fantastic, especially with Rime Stealer giving you free frost armor from defeating a frozen target or breaking a stasis crystal. Again, this is the catered role, so you have Rime Stealer and Chill Clip, which is absolutely nuts. Where the Horde is fantastic here. For your primary weapons, having Wicked Implement is good too. Having Headstone is pretty sick as well. I have this Bold Endings with Headstone, Dragonfly. It's great for PvE. Even the new seasonal grenade launcher is pretty solid in the kinetic slot as well. For energy weapons, honestly, any weapon that can apply the Jolt or Blind effect is going to be pretty good. For your special weapons, Forbearance is fantastic, whether you have the Vowed Disciple version or the Into the Light Onslaught version. Again, Ambitious Assassin, Chain Reaction, great for crowd control. Plus, having grenade launchers apply the weaken debuff to those tougher targets is pretty good. And Debt of Kindness is always a solid option as well. And for heavy weapons, like I said, you can use what you like. The main thing, in my opinion, is that having your weapons match up in the energy and heavy slot is going to be good, especially with the armor mods you're going to be taking advantage of. And before we dive into the armor mods that I'm using, let's talk about what stats you want to look for. Number one, we talk about every video, try to have tier 10 100 resilience. It's a 30% damage reduction, which you want in PvE, especially in those harder activities. Next, discipline. Obviously, discipline is tied to how fast we can get the grenade back, and the more Bleak Watchers that we can get, the more freeze and slow we can have on the field with the improved versions with Rime-Coat Raiment. After that, you could focus on strength for your melee. You could focus on recovery, since recovery is tied to the class ability for the Warlock. But again, the main two would be resilience and discipline. For my armor mods, starting with the helmet, I'm personally going with Arc Siphon, so those rapid arc weapon final blows will create orbs of power. You could go with the Stasis Siphon if you are using the Lost Signal grenade launcher. That's very easy orb creation right there. And then I'm using Heavy Ammo Finder and Heavy Ammo Scout so I can have more of the heavy ammo. On the gauntlets, I'm using Impact Induction and Focusing Strike, so when I get powered melee hits, it's going to give me a cooldown to my grenade and my class ability, and then I'm also using Arc Loader so I can have that increased reload speed for my arc weapons. On my chest piece, I'm going with Arc Reserve so I can have more ammo for my arc heavy weapon, but again, depending on what weapons you're using, make sure you use the corresponding reserve mod. Then I just have Solar and Void Resistance, but again, you can put on whatever resistance mods that you like depending on the activity you're doing. On my boots, I'm using Recuperation, so when I pick up an Orb of Power, I get health back each time, and this is kind of a just-in-case thing. I already have enough survivability things with both the subclasses with Frost Armor and Devour and whatnot, so this one isn't absolutely necessary, but I do like it, especially if I'm doing tougher activities. And then I like double arc weapon surge. Again, make sure your surges match with whatever weapon damage type you're using. Essentially, my arc weapons gain a small bonus to damage while I have any armor charge. My armor charge now decays over time. Essentially, when you collect an orb of power, you will gain an armor charge. With this build, you can have a maximum of 3 armor charges, and with any of these blue mods, it puts a 10-second timer on 1 armor charge. So at 3 armor charges, we get 30 seconds of that bonus weapon damage. And then last on the class item, I'm using Reaper. So shortly after I use my class ability, as long as I get a weapon final blow, it'll spawn an orb of power. With Powerful Attraction, automatically collects nearby orbs of power when I activate my class ability. And then lastly, I use Outreach, so it reduces my melee cooldown whenever I use my class ability. But you could switch this out for something like Bomber, which cools down your grenade ability. The main difference you're going to have to get used to with this build versus, the Getaway Artist or the Osmiomancy builds with the Bleak Watcher is that this one benefits you the most when you are with your Bleak Watcher. With Osmiomancy, you can have 2 Bleak Watchers, you can throw them out, they can hit targets from different angles. I understand that, that's still a very good setup, but with this, you get the most benefit from being inside the domain. You get the protection and the regeneration with the Stasis Crystals. Not only does the Bleak Watcher get more range, if you're shooting targets within the storm, you can also apply slow to them, which is just absolutely insane. The other thought that I had with the Vantage Point Pulse Rifle that I have, so we have Unstoppable Pulse this season, right? I can also jolt targets with it, which means I can handle 2 types of champions with 1 weapon. And even if it wasn't Unstoppable Pulse, I'd still be able to proc that overload with the slow bullets from the weapon, which means any of my weapons that take advantage of the Bleak domain bullets are going to apply slow, which means I can handle those overload champions, eventually freeze them. I can handle unstoppable champions. I think both the Prismatic and the Stasis version have their own benefits. With Prismatic, you have Devour, which means each time you get a kill, you get health back, which means you're probably more apt to use the Empowering Rift inside of the Bleak domain. And for, the big obvious reason is taking advantage of Transcendence for the, Transcendent Grenade, the increased weapon damage whenever you have it, and also having the Song of Flame super not being tied to a specific subclass with Prismatic is pretty good. Even with the Stasis subclass, when you pop the Bleak Watcher, even if you're inside of it and you decide to use the Healing Rift so you can have some of the health back because you don't have Devour, that's totally fine, because whenever you freeze those targets, creating those Stasis shards, they're going to automatically track to you. You're going to get your melee energy back. Also, whenever you pop Crystalline Converter, that's more free Stasis Crystals, and whenever you break those Stasis Crystals, Whisper of Shards kicks in, gives you the grenade back even faster, and considering the amount of crystals you're going to have on the field, you're pretty much going to have this increased grenade regen 24/7, so you don't have to worry about that. Plus, with Serve Cold on the artifact, whenever you collect a Stasis Shard, it also gives you class ability back, which means you're probably going to have faster ability regen across the board with Stasis versus Prismatic overall. I would say the only downside to the Stasis version in of itself is the super. That is probably the worst thing about it. With Winter's Wrath, again, it's really good for crowd control. You can freeze and break a bunch of targets. That is fantastic, but again, that's probably the weakest link to Stasis. Everything else is absolutely fantastic in my opinion. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is my Rime-Coat Raiment, Prismatic, and Stasis builds. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm actually going to put the dim link for both of the Prismatic and Stasis builds in the description, so if you want to copy everything that I'm using, down to the subclass, the weapons, the armor mods, even the drip if you like. I try to make my Guardians look pretty good, matching the gear a little bit. But go ahead and copy it and test it out for yourself. If there's something that you like using with this build, definitely let me know in the comments, whether it's, a fragment, a weapon, an armor mod, anything like that. If there's something that you find enjoyable, definitely let me know. I'm testing stuff out in this game all the time. In any event, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on that bell next to notifications so you don't miss out on any other Destiny builds here on the channel. If you didn't know, we live stream here on YouTube and also over on Twitch. That link will be in the description. We will be doing Vesper's host dungeon help. So if you want help with the dungeon, come by stream, hop in the chat, say something. If we're running it, we can definitely help you out. And if you want to be proactive, join my Discord. We're going to have plenty of people looking to run the dungeon. So if you would like help, whether it's from me or somebody in my community, definitely hop in. And lastly, if you want to help support the channel even more, you can look into becoming a member. If you don't know what a membership is, it's essentially like a Twitch subscription, but it is technically cheaper. In any event, you do get access to the exclusive emotes, the monthly badges, and other cool stuff here on the channel. Mainly being, you can get access to all of my long form videos early. So if you want to see a new Destiny build early, you can get access to it right away when I post it. So if you want more information, all you have to do is press the join button, next subscribe, and that'll give you a rundown with all the details you need. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been your boy. We'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.